back to this week's edition of The Blame Game. Now, despite what the title says, we will be talking about finals performances of people like Zeus and Pyosik and the bot lane and Beryl and all that stuff. I want to acknowledge that will be coming later before we dive into the main topic, though, which is about 4th seeds, because your boy was previously against them, and I got to blame game myself on this one for being wrong. This is especially relevant given the interview or media press conferencing that has gone on with John Needham from Global Esports talking about format changes for next year. So I want to talk about what my position was in the past, why it's changed, and then why, going forward and what we need to change with the other format things, even that we won't be getting double elim, and how 4 seeds can factor into that. So I was previously anti-4th seed, and that's changed, and I don't think the reason I was anti-4th seed was ever really well explained by me and has sometimes been misunderstood, because for me, Worlds has 2 conflicting ideas going on. There is having the best, most competitive tournament possible, and then there's having a tournament that represents all the regions in the world. And those 2 ideas do not mesh completely, because we all know the LPL and the LCK are the best 2 regions in the world, and many of their teams are better than the teams that are attending World. And so if you wanted the best competitive tournament in the world, you would just have those 2 regions and like maybe an LEC team or 2, and that's it. And you could just ignore the entire rest of the world. But it's important for the ecosystem to give these regions and their teams a chance to play against the best, not just to improve, but for fans to get excited when they watch their players go against them. Sometimes you can see upsets, cool things can happen. We saw Loud take down NAEU. We've seen the LJL. We beat RNG in a game. That was crazy. They've also found upsets against major regions. And so that kind of stuff can help grow those scenes, not just with their players, but their viewer base and their attachment and all these kinds of things. And it's important for a healthy global ecosystem that you don't just cater to your 2 biggest markets or your 2 best markets and let everything else wither on the vine because they weren't good enough anyways. And so the idea of having extra seeds for these regions, it was never a dismissal that those seeds didn't deserve it, like those teams weren't good or better than the majority of teams attending Worlds, but that they weren't needed in a sense. A lot of my pushback has been about people who go out there and say like, the LPL has 4, 5, 6 teams that could realistically win Worlds. No, there's never been strong evidence of that. They have never really dominated the entire bracket for years the way Korea has, where they have 3 of their 4 teams in semifinals. That has happened multiple times across history. So I have always pushed back on that reason. I think sometimes that gets misconstrued as saying those teams aren't good enough. Even LPL's best years have only seen 2 teams in semifinals, so the idea that they're secretly housing 4 or 5 teams that could win Worlds was something that I just didn't believe in, and would still argue I don't really believe in. I think those takes are a little ridiculous. And the problem I have is not that those teams aren't potentially better or weren't potentially better than LCS's or LEC's teams, but it was that you didn't need them to represent their region because those regions were already represented by teams that were going to win Worlds. And that was the problem I had, was that even if they could make quarters or semis, they would probably lose to one of the teams from their own region or from the LCK, or vice versa if it's an LCK rep against an LPL rep. Because even if they were the 4th best team in the world, they were better maybe even than the 3rd seed from their own region, they would not be better than the majority of the teams attending Worlds from their own region. There's a reason that they're 4th. We've watched them play all year against their own representatives. We don't need a 4th to know that like the LCK is better. We already know that. So again, my problem was not that these teams were not going to make the tournament more competitive, but that we didn't need that at the cost of potentially representation for these other regions, where I think the importance of that was bigger than the importance of competitiveness, because we already had pretty competitive Worlds, I would say. I think there's a lot of things in format that could make it a lot better and more competitive, but that's not the 4th seeds fixing that. It's just fix the format. And I think that the representation angle can sometimes get lost by the most hardcore fans who just want to watch the best League of Legends, because that is true. But it's not universally true. And I think you can see that even at this Worlds, even though we had the highest viewed finals of all time by over 1 million because the storylines were amazing and the gameplay was amazing and all this stuff, leading up to that, it was actually suffering in viewership. And a large part of that is time zones. I don't want to hand wave that fact away, but I think another portion of it was that it was domination for a lot of regions that they did not get many chances to watch. And so I'm sure some people tuned out over the course of Worlds and then tuned back in for the finals. And so this kind of push and pull of regional representation and strength of the tournament has been clashing on and off. And I thought that 4th seeds did not elevate the level of competition of the tournament enough to justify what they were costing us Because even if they're better than us, they're not going to be better than the 1, 2, 3 from their own region. Wrong. You're an idiot. Enter DRX, and boy, was I wrong. And heading into the semifinals against Gen G, even if they didn't win the finals, after semifinals, I was ready to make this video and admit that I was an idiot and I was wrong. Because the thing that I was so scared about was DRX bumping into Gen G in semifinals and getting rolled 3-0, 3-1. And it's like, why watch this? I've watched LCK all year. I know DRX is worse than Gen G, and why do we need a 4 seed to prove what we already know? Even if they're better than everyone from the LEC and LCS, they're not gonna beat Gen G. Gen G can go win Worlds. We don't need to see this matchup. We could have seen it regionally a dozen times. Even in the middle of that series, when Gen G grabs the lead in game 1, I was talking to Vedius about this, and I was like, see, you know, like this is the problem. And then game 2 is rolling around, and that level 3 bot lane gank goes wrong, and everything's terrible. And I'm like, oh my god, this is going to be a 3-0. It's going to be a terrible semifinals. And somehow, Zeka just puts on his carry pants on Ahri, and they grab control of that game, and they run away with it. DRX's inclusion in the tournament was obviously incredible before that. The fact that they pushed EDG to 5 games with a reverse sweep, the Nexus respawn, or inhib respawn, Def's birthday, there was already a ton of amazing storylines that was coming from this team, and so I don't want to discredit any of that and say that that wasn't important, but I was, you know, not fully sold on 4th seed still attending, despite the excellent performance that DRX had shown at the tournament. But once they did that, it was like, okay, well, they beat Gen G, who obviously shows that anything can happen, so even if they don't beat T1, we gotta have 4 seeds now. And then they beat T1. And then they have the most incredible story ever. And we have the best finals ever. And we have the best worlds ever. And a lot of things went right beyond DRX to make that be the case. Quarterfinals were actually bangers. Sorry, except for Rogue. The semifinals were also pretty good, even though there were 3-1s. The narratives, the gameplay, all that stuff led together to make such an incredible tournament. However, I don't think you can count on this always being the case. And so that's why there will need to be format changes going forward, because while this is the year, it's like the exception that proved the rule. Like, because this year was so incredible, you look back at all the other years where things went wrong, where KTIG is happening in quarters, and like all these other tournaments that we've had using this format that have flopped in some areas because of poor seeding or the other things that we're going to dig into here. I think this is the worlds that we should be hoping for and expecting every single time, and we shouldn't have to rely on 4th seeds and incredible runs and this kind of stuff to make it happen, though I do welcome their inclusion now. For me, LoL esports and worlds should be fluid based off the changing eras as the landscape of the global ecosystem changes. I'm not married to always having one tournament format, you know, one way of approaching the scene. We can evolve with the times. We don't have to be archaic and stuck in our ways, and it's about time we've seen bigger shakeups in the world's format. And if there comes a time where 4th seeds fail to get anything done again for 3 years, like, yeah, let's pull them out again, and then maybe we reintroduce them later or something, you know, like, I'm more than willing to keep things kind of fluid. And for now, DRX has proved that the best regions in the world should definitely get some extra seeds, because my pre-assumptions about how they would never rise over their own regions, other titans, was wrong. So if we're not going to change 4 seeds, and as John Needham talked about, we're not going to get double elim, which, by the way, I'm still in favor of, but it is what it is. I'm not going to keep shouting at a wall that we're not going to get it. What are the changes that I would like to see and that we do really need? There's 2 big ones for me, and one is fixing/killing play-ins and just starting the tournament, and 2, changing groups in such a way that they can lead to a better bracket stage of play. I'm not going to go super hard on the spreadsheets breaking down the format the way that I typically do, because this suggestion has already been on Reddit, but I just do want to respond to some of the concerns that people had and clarify a couple things. With 4 groups of 6, you can fit those basically into the same amount of time as we currently get with 4 groups of 4 by reducing it to single round robin and slamming through that in 2 weeks the way that we currently do. Basically, you play 5 games then, but that's already exactly what play-in stage is already, except it's 2 groups of 6 playing single round robin. And while it's not perfect, it gives you a strong enough understanding of which teams are good in order to know who to eliminate from the bottom, because you really only want to get rid of 2 teams basically in the situation. 2 or 3, I would argue, because with the time that you're buying from killing play-ins and not needing to do a second group stage, is you're able to have an expanded bracket. And I would love to see a 12-team bracket, a 16-team bracket. I was hoping for double elim. That's not going to happen. But you can still expand the bracket to allow for much more teams to get experience in best of 5s. Something that's commonly misunderstood with this argumentation is that it's like trying to save NA and EU so that way we can still get out of groups even if we perform worse, because suddenly there's 3 out of 6 teams getting out instead of 2 out of 4, so there's more space for what is typically, NA or EU in the third spot there. But it's also for teams like TES. Like, there's plenty of times where pretty good Korean or Chinese teams flop a little bit in group stage. FPX from a year ago or something, and maybe they just had a bad group stage and they were actually an incredible team. Saving these kinds of teams that are good but then underperform a little bit might be a way to get them into the bracket stage and preserve some extra narratives for people who are fans of that team or whatnot. Yes, obviously the biggest winners probably are going to be EU and NA, but we really, I think, need that in order to have more compelling matches between us, because we got one best of 5 between us this year. It's only the 3rd ever at Worlds, I'm pretty sure it was, or maybe it was international completely. I can't remember what my stat was, but it's like, this is one of the biggest rivalries in the esport. In theory, is our two fan bases wanting to see who's better, and we're always measuring up to each other, and it's just like the format doesn't accommodate that at all. I mean, like, it would be nice to have more international tournaments that can also fix these problems, but if we're not going to get extra tournaments, then we at least need to fix the current one to be able to put these kinds of situations in for other regions other than LPL and LCK, because they're pretty well served right now. And again, there are situations where the LPL and LCK are served by this, by getting more teams through that would have gotten knocked out through a fumble in the group stage. One of the biggest complaints I saw about this, which just shows that people didn't quite understand it, is the idea that suddenly there's going to be more stomps because you're taking 2 teams from play-ins and putting them into each group. But play-ins is already the exact same ratio of competitive teams playing against each other, which is one of the weird things for me, because in play-ins you have 4 minor region teams playing up against 2 major region teams. And I know this isn't true, but like, the concern is that these 2 just stomp these 4, and then these 2 play a competitive game, and these 4 play a competitive game. Well, all we're doing by killing play-ins and putting the teams into one of these 4 other groups is we're just flipping the ratio, because now it's basically 4 major region teams. And again, you can argue VCS and PCS and all this kind of stuff, but like, in theory, it's 4 major region teams now against 2 minor region teams, which keeps the same ratio where these 2 are going to get stomped by these 4 instead of these 2 stomping these 4 this way. But then you have competitive games here and competitive games here. So in theory, it's like the same number of stomps you would potentially get anyways. And a lot of the times these games are not as stompy as you think, covered by the fact that Fnatic lost, EG lost, RNG lost, like against the good minor regions or some of these teams that are kind of in between, like the PCS and VCS, like those games will be fun to watch. And you have to look at the upside of getting more best of 5s as a result of being able to free up this space. The other major benefit of having it done this way is if you're taking 4 teams from each group, you can do a much better job properly seeding your bracket. And this is the biggest thing for me going forward, more so than fixing play-ins, is fixing seeding. And even if you're not going to kill play-ins and just slam them all together, please at least put more teams in each group, so that way not just 2 people get out and you have no idea how to make a bracket when you have 4 2 seeds and 4 1 seeds, because you have no idea if these 2 seeds, who's stronger than who's stronger than who over here. You don't even know if the 2 seed is weaker or stronger than the 1 seed, because maybe you had the 2 best teams in the entire tournament in the same group together. Like, especially the way you draw groups by like us pretending that NA's 1 seed is like the same as LCK's 2 and stuff. Like, we all know that's not true. Like, we just need to start changing how we're building these brackets completely, and make it so that we're getting proper seeding, so that way you don't have KT, IG, or these kinds of things repeat themselves. If you have 4 groups of 6, then it's very easy to take, let's say, 3 teams or 4 teams out, and you can pre-seed the 1 seeds and have the 2, 3 from other groups play each other and see who can win there. If you have 4 seeds coming out of 6 teams, well, then you just have the 1 play the 4 from another group. And that is a much bigger spread than 1 versus 2. So you don't have these big kills going on immediately. All these suggestions also have to take account into the logistics of the scene. I think the expanded bracket with this killed play-in format is one of the better things, because it will save a lot of logistical time on how you actually run this format. All right, that's enough about formats though. Let's talk about actual performance, because boy, some people have been getting some flame. We're gonna start in the top lane with Zeus. Now, I'm not gonna go through examples the way I typically do, because I'm just trying to rush this video out there and cover a large breadth of topics, not go quite as deep as I normally do. But it's fair to say that Zeus underperformed compared to most people's expectations. A lot of people have him as the number 1 or 2 best top laner in the world, and to get gapped effectively by Kingen, who gets to play the finals MVP, is a big surprise. And especially, there was a lot of complaints about the draft. I don't like the draft, but I don't feel like it's fair to blame on Zeus. Zeus, if you want to flame him for getting solo killed at level 6 in a counterpick matchup that he got. Don't flame the draft, because as you can tell by looking at the draft, this is way more decided by problems in the bot lane than problems in the top lane. The biggest problem I have with fans speculating about what's happening in drafts is you never really know what's going on. People were saying that Zeus was egoing into Kingen, and that's why they left the Aatrox up and didn't take it and took counterpick. But if you look at their actual draft, they double ban Beryl with Renata and Heimer bans, which are not meta at all. And then because DRX let the Caitlyn through and banned the Lux instead, their bot lane doesn't seem to know what to do, and they take the Karma away, which is one of the other common pairings with Caitlyn to give her prio in the lane. And it also counters one of the other common pairings, which is Morgana. And so with the Lux ban, you know, Karma should beat Morgana in lane, and then you can pair it with Varus or Ezreal or something. And so they think they've countered the Caitlyn. And despite that fact, DRX still takes the Caitlyn. This also allows them to grab the Azir, and now there's pressure on Faker, because if he doesn't want to play melee matchups like the Akali, which is already banned, or the Sylas into it, he needs to take the Victor here, else he'll get banned in the second rotation. So that raises the prio on mid lane picks, and then they want to grab their AD carry into it so it doesn't get banned out either, which leaves no space for Zeus to take the Aatrox away. At this point, Aatrox and Zeus could just be trying to be team players here, and they're like, all right guys, you're having these problems, I'll be fine, I'm just trying to be a team player, and it has nothing to do with his decision making. If anything, I'd be mad at the bot lane for needing this many resources and still getting outperformed in game 5. Because what Beryl does is absolutely fucking incredible. Caitlyn is the lane dominant champion. She's had highest presence in the meta, and you know, like, the way you play her is you stomp lane early, you get an advantage, you have pressure, you get objectives, and you're able to then transition into control with the traps in the mid game and all this kind of stuff. And he just goes, yeah, fuck that, I'm taking Bard. Like, the most antithetical champion to what Caitlyn wants to do in the early game. He's just gonna sack lane because T1's like, great, we won lane now, we took Karma Varus, you can't stop us. And he's like, yeah, you're right, I'm just gonna go somewhere else. And like, it just completely counters what the identity of T1's bot lane was trying to do. Yeah, the Caitlyn ends up falling behind, but it's like, whatever, she can still just lay traps down, and the game was more about topside and mid and stuff like that. So yes, obviously I don't like T1's draft giving Azir, Caitlyn, Aatrox, 3 of the highest prio champions in the entire game over to the other team. But I say that's just DRX having a big brain and like the bot lane really misinterpreting what they should have been doing here. I don't really blame Zeus for this draft the way fans are doing it. Like, he just mind controlled the rest of his team into having to go into this situation. That's not to say I don't think he's free from criticism, because like I said, he played the game out pretty poorly, and if you want to go back even to semifinals, it's fair to say again that 369 beat him up there. He did have some good games, obviously the Yone one, and I think his Camille game was better than a lot of people were giving him credit for, just because the scoreline wasn't great. But at the end of the day, I'd still say 369 had the better series than him, so it wasn't like Zeus was crushing the entire tournament the way he was kind of earlier on. He did have a sickness, from what I understand, leading into the finals week. So maybe that hurt his performance a little bit there, but at the end of the day, if you're going to flame him for anything, just flame him for the play. Don't flame him for the draft. And even then, you shouldn't be flaming him that hard, because this was a super close series. A lot of people are also flaming Pyosik for missing a lot of smites, and people have been arguing about how much is his fault. Was it the Kalista Rens? Was it Varus Q being broken and stuff like that? And honestly, a lot of the times, if I'm being truthful, it was just Beryl's fault. Like, there's no reason in game 1 that they, with the control they had, lost both early game Dragons and the Herald. These are not all on him. A lot of it's how his team is playing as well. But like, this series was so much closer than it actually should have been if DRX actually got all the objectives that they control. This could have been a 3-1 series with how much better DRX was playing in the early game, but they just kind of like fumbled away a ton of objectives that made it way closer. And again, it's not all on Pyosik, but it's also not on Pyosik, and so like I understand people commenting on it, but he did have incredible performances away from just that. His playmaking was really useful. The fact that he ate a bunch of bans as well in the 5th game and then busted out the Hecarim out of nowhere, which is actually a great pick into the double immobile backline that T1 had built, as well as the lack of lockdown CC means that there's no way to really stop him from just charging around. So like, Pyosik having a good champ pool and stuff was a huge benefit for them, so I'm not trying to say that he was undeserving. I know people are trying to make sure he doesn't get crowned here, but like, I have no problem admitting that the smites weren't good, and you can flame those a little bit. That's gonna do it for this episode of The Blood Game. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm sorry this one was a little bit more scatterbrained and without as much deep research with all the VOD clips pulled together and whatnot. If I'm being fully honest, I'm a little burnt out. Been traveling a ton for the last month and a half. Came back after finals, just cranked this one out to give you guys something to listen to and kind of relive some moments from finals and whatnot. Hopefully you enjoyed. I think I'll be having another one next week. I'm not sure. I'll catch you guys then.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching that video. I'm at Worlds right now, and I would not be here live watching games that have no Western teams in them whatsoever, but still having a good time. If it wasn't for Alienware sponsoring our trip out here, we've done a whole bunch of stuff, and it couldn't have happened without them. So thank you so much to Alienware. If you want to support them supporting me, please click the link in the description below and purchase something. Doesn't even have to be a computer. I mean, it could be, but it could also be like a headset or a monitor. Anyway, they make great stuff. Check them out.